Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 13th February 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, of course, Mike Robinson.
Well,
exactly.
Yes.
We have to pause at this point.
Let's just get to it. The government has announced that they've partnered with an organisation called ASI Data Science, to develop a new technology which apparently is going to automatically detect terrorist content on any online platform. Brian, it's fantastic. They've run some tests, and this has shown that the new tool can automatically detect 94% of Daesh propaganda with 99.995% accuracy. So this is absolutely, the type of thing that you would see in science fiction, it seems. It has extremely high degree of accuracy. For instance, if it analyzes 1 million randomly selected videos, only 50 would require additional human review. So this is spectacular. It can be used on any platform, integrated into the upload process so that the majority of video propaganda is stopped before it ever reaches the internet. This is according to the Home Office. It was developed, as I say, by the Home Office and ASI Data Science. They gave ASI Data Science £600,000 for their part of this. The Home Office and ASI will be sharing the methodology behind the new model with smaller companies, they say, in order to help combat the abuse of their platforms by terrorists and supporters. Many of the major tech companies have developed technology specific to their own platforms and have publicly reported on the difference this is making to their fight against terrorist content. Smaller platforms, however, are increasingly targeted by ISIS and its supporters, and often don't have the same level of resources to develop technology. So this is fantastic stuff. Amber Rudd said this: over the past year, we've been engaging with internet companies to make sure that their platforms are not being abused by terrorists and their supporters. I have been impressed with their work so far. She said the purpose of these videos is to incite violence, ISIS videos, in our communities, recruit people to their cause, and attempt to spread fear in our society. We know that automated technology like this can heavily disrupt the terrorist actions, as well as prevent people from being exposed to these horrific images. The government has been taking the lead worldwide in making sure that this vile terrorist content is stamped out. So the question is, who are ASI Data Science? Well, apparently they empower organisations such as EasyJet, the BBC, Tesco, Siemens to become more data-driven, apparently. So that's good stuff. In 2016, they received £1.5 million of new investment from Jan Tallinn, who was one of the founders of Skype. And they've also received backing from Local Globe, which is a venture capital firm owned by Saul and Robin Klein. ASI's chief executive is Mark Warner. And he said that applying artificial intelligence to business problems will be one of the biggest transformational opportunities of the 21st century. And it's certainly, he said, part of his plan to bring AI to the masses. Well, Amber Rudd is heading over to California, to Silicon Valley, to hold a series of meetings with various communication service providers, Facebook and the rest, but she's also going to be meeting with smaller companies like Vimeo, Telegraph, pCloud, to talk to them about how they can be helped to remove terrorist content from their platforms. And she's also going to meet the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristen Nielsen, to discuss how the UK and US can work together to tackle terrorist content online. Well, she's also going to appear at a Digital Forum event today, later on. And she'll also meet the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism, which of course was launched at Theresa May's behest by the main social media networks a few months ago. So she's a busy lady, and what is this? Some half-hearted attempt to initiate the Great Firewall of the United Kingdom. But what we're doing is handing over to an alleged AI infrastructure to decide what is appropriate content and what isn't.
Very interesting stuff, this, Mike. I'm always interested in the people. So we've got Mark Warner. Who is Mark Warner? Who is his company? When you go to the ASI website, It's not immediately apparent who the people are. I spent a bit of time on it. I might have missed something, but all we largely see is him. So he's got a background in physics from Imperial College. He was then at the London Centre for Nanotechnology. So he's done a lot of work on nanotechnology as opposed to AI, but he then goes to Harvard. Then he's got a company. Then that company gets 1.25 million. I don't know whether the 600,000 is in that.
No, it's
you've
on
just
top of that, I
mentioned.
think.
On top of that. And then he's advising the British government, but you don't know who he is, you don't know who his team is, and you don't know who that team is connected with. So I'm highly suspicious as to who this young man is, who his team is, and who's really driving this agenda. And then I'm slightly amused that he's boasting of his AI capability, but of course, ultimately, as always, it has to be checked by a human being. To claim it's 100% accurate, that's what he's doing on 94%. This sounds to me like some schoolboy dream. Who is Mark Warner? That's the question.
And in an effort to everybody keeping pressure on social media platforms as much as possible, Unilever have said that they are going to cut advertising budgets from the likes of Facebook and so on if they don't do something about dealing with extreme content. The thing that this comes back to, in my mind, Brian, is David Cameron's initial speech to the General Assembly of the United Nations when he was talking about extremist content. He was not only discussing Islamic extremism, he was talking about people that are skeptical of the government mainstream narrative. So, you know, what will the scope of this AI be?
Well, it'll be mission creep, Mike. It'll start out with something which is emotive to the public, extremism, those terrorists, those nasty Islamic terrorists, and then it's going to creep sideways because, as we'll see in a minute with the Soros saga, anybody who dares criticise what George Soros is doing to back Remain is branded as a right-wing racist extremist. So I think this is going to be pushed out right the way across anybody who challenges the government.
Well, let's move on to Oxfam. And I just caught this headline on Sky News. Oxfam former Development Secretary Greening, that's Justine Greening, absolutely shocked by the claims against Oxfam. She was speaking to Sky News. She said she was absolutely shocked. She said, "I don't recall being aware of those allegations while she was in post, but I certainly know that whenever I had any instances raised with me, they always would have been followed up. I'm not the kind of person who would have ignored anything like that. Why would anyone?" Well, right. Well, this it's interesting, Ms. Greening, and I'm going to say, well, just look at this because you're suggesting that you didn't know what was going on. So we'll look at this. Well, the Charity Commission for England and Wales has announced that they are opening a statutory inquiry today into Oxfam, and they are going to improve safeguarding in the charity sector as a whole, they claim. They say that this has come after the allegations made against Oxfam regarding misconduct by staff involved in the humanitarian response in Haiti. They said that they have concerns that Oxfam may not have fully and frankly disclosed material details about the allegations at the time in 2011, about its handling of the incident since, and the impact that these have had on public trust and confidence. But this is quite interesting because actually Oxfam, the Charity Commission had already been investigating Oxfam during the course of 2011, and they had produced a report which came out in December. It said that in 2017 we engaged, this is the Charity Commission saying this, we engaged with Oxfam over its handling of a number of concerning allegations about recent and non-recent safeguarding incidents involving senior programme staff, including allegations of sexual harassment of other staff. Our case focused on establishing how the charity manages safeguarding, including its responses to such individual allegations. This has included considering the steps the trustees take to ensure all people who come into contact with the charity, including its staff and volunteers, are protected from harm and distress. We conducted a detailed review of relevant records relating to the charity's strategic and day-to-day management of safeguarding, including related HR matters and its handling of allegations of incidents involving staff. We also met with the charity's senior leadership, including its chief executive and safeguarding managers, to discuss the concerns and to learn more about the charity's approach, policies and practices around safeguarding and related HR matters. And they said that they had established that the charity had a strong policy framework, clearly worked in this case, around protecting staff and beneficiaries from sexual exploitation and abuse, which is underpinned by activities of a dedicated safeguarding unit. And they also saw evidence of several examples of best practice. But they said that many of the allegations reported against country staff, senior country staff, relating to sexual abuse and exploitation were not substantiated. Well, they've been substantiated now, so I'm questioning here, how good is this statutory investigation going to be that they've initiated today, when they ran an investigation last year which found nothing?
Yeah, well,
so it goes on though, right? But we concluded there's further work to do for the charity to do in respect of its HR culture and overall governance and management of safeguarding. The Commission considers that the charity needs to be more mindful of the allocation of resources, which enables an appropriate balance between proactive and preventive activity in the investigation of individual allegations. So basically, they said nothing of any use. They apparently found nothing particular wrong with the charity, but then we have these revelations over Haiti, and apparently today more revelations about alleged sexual abuse taking place involving children in Oxfam charity shops.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it, Mike? And of course, when UK Column was pointing a finger at the charity Common Purpose, and of course later on what was discovered, Matthew Byrne, one of the Merseyside Common Purpose Advisory Board members, horrific crimes. I will leave people to look him up for themselves, horrific crimes. Was there any investigation by Common Purpose? Nothing that was made public. Was there any police investigation into him and his links through Common Purpose? No investigation at all. Was there any follow-up on the fact that Common Purpose have been providing training in many schools across the country, particularly in Sheffield area, with no CRB checks? Nothing was followed up on that at all. So what we consistently see is that when allegations come to the surface or evidence comes to the surface, overwhelmingly there's a close down. But it's beginning to grow, so people might have missed this from a couple of days ago. It's focusing in on Brandon Cox. This is Daily Mail, and the article is that it's alleged that Mr. Cox grabbed the hips, pulled the hair and forced his thumb into a lady's mouth in America in a sexual way. This was a lady working in a US government job. She reported the incident to the police as a sex assault claim. And what comes to light again in this article, this is some of the detail here. So it's quite a explicit report on what the lady reported to the American police, included a text which he sent her later. But the other part of this story is that this man had already left Save the Children after there'd been numerous other complaints about him. So quite remarkable that, of course, here we've got people tied in with the mainstream political parties. These are all allegations at the moment, but they seem to be building up. But is any action taken against these major charities? No. And of course, one of the things that we've consistently said in our UK Column reports is that child abuse survivors simply laugh when you say to them, well, didn't you get any help from NSPCC or Barnardo's or any of the other major charities? Those survivors have simply laughed and said, well, of course, the abusers are embedded within those charities as well. Maybe we're beginning to see it. And just to bring things full circle, we'll bring in the Open Government Partnership. Now, we mentioned them a couple of days ago. This is bringing us back towards George Soros. But I was intrigued to see that we've got Helle Thorning-Schmidt as one of the Open Government Partnership ambassadors, but she's also there as the Chief Executive Officer of Save the Children International. So remarkable, isn't it? All these people clustered around the mainstream parties. Of course, this lady married to, and I'm going to forget his name, at that point in South Wales. It'll come to me in just a second. Mr. Kinnock, Stephen Kinnock, thank you for that. Here she is in working with a major children's charity, that charity now coming under the spotlight alongside Oxfam. Well, we'll contrast that with the testimony of a very brave Metropolitan policeman, John Wedger. This man speaking out to UK Column on audio or in audio and video, clearly saying that the British government, MPs, charities, local authorities covered up child abuse in London, including the deaths of children. He was vilified, hounded at work. He's doing a walk from London to Manchester. This is his Just Giving page. He was after £5,000, and I'm delighted to say that today I can report that Just Giving target, thank you, is up to 6,255. Now, the additional money over his target of £5,000 is going to go to a charity, and if you go to the Just Giving site, you can actually have a look at that. So some good news there, Mike, but it's taken John Wedger to suffer so much in order to get that story out. Mainstream press, the BBC in particular, simply will not follow through on the evidence.
Now, something that we've suggested quite a number of times now is that we foresee a possibility of the European Commission, the European Union, pushing policing from one European nation into another with a view to, there being no particular local ties, and that, highlighting that there's a risk in this. Well, it seems that it's actually going to happen, and they're going to use immigration as the excuse, and they're going to start off with the border police. So they have announced that the EU and Albania have agreed to allow European border police to deploy on Albanian territory on areas on the Albanian side of the border with the EU. This is all about protecting the EU's border from immigration, apparently, because the EU clearly has that and has had that as a major policy objective for quite some time. I think not. They say aim to improve immigration operations in the Western Balkans. They say that strengthened operational cooperation between priority third countries and European border and Coast Guard Agency will contribute to better management of irregular migration, further enhance security at the EU's external border, and strengthen the agency's ability to act in the EU's immediate neighbourhood. And they're currently negotiating similar agreements with Serbia and also the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. And they hope for swift conclusions on that because they need to get their own personnel into those countries as quickly as possible. Quickly as possible.
And I'll just say that tomorrow we'll put up details of the excellent Albanian talk that was given at Ian Crane's last Alternative View event. It's about an hour-long, spectacular analysis of what has taken place in Albania. And if you want to understand the damage really being done to Eastern Europe and society there, you need to watch that. So we'll try and make that available tomorrow.
Now, Brian, I saw this headline. Thanks to the person who sent this to us. I saw this headline earlier and, I wasn't quite sure how to react. Britain set to enforce military might over China by sailing through contested waters. This was the Daily Express. Absolutely spectacular headline. They say that Britain's HMS Sutherland will enforce its military might after vowing to sail through the South China Sea. That wasn't my mistake, by the way, that was theirs. In a move that could enrage China next month, it has been revealed. I'm not certain whether it's going to enrage China. I think it's going to make China laugh quite a lot.
They'll be laughing is the answer, Mike. Yep.
Because the entire British Navy are the only ship that's actually capable of deploying at the moment, sailing close to the Chinese coast. Gavin Williamson said that this voyage from Sutherland would demonstrate the UK's freedom and navigation prowess. Does that demonstrate our navigational prowess?
I think it's unbelievable childish nonsense. I can't really express it strongly enough because the British military is being destroyed behind the scenes. Queen Elizabeth class aircraft carrier we know is restricted at time at sea because they have not got enough personnel to keep that ship fully operational.
Well, Yep, Gavin Williamson said she'll be sailing through the South China Sea and making it clear our Navy has the right to do that.
Okay.
So there you go. So I am giving the Daily Express today's Fake News Award because that is the most obscene piece of reporting with no sort of analysis of this or no criticism of the government in any way. Sorry, Daily Express, that's a major fail from you.
It is. And we'll just remind people that if you haven't been into the UK column website recently, go in and have a look at the EU military unification series. It includes a timeline which puts together all of the major events that have taken place. But there is no Brexit. Mike was absolutely spot on with this many, many months ago. He said there would be no Brexit. There is no Brexit because in the background, our military forces are being fully unified with the EU system. That includes procurement of new systems, and ultimately that is leading through a treasury. So complete lies by British Prime Minister Theresa May and her Conservative government. There is no Brexit, and the British military has to be reduced to a Coast Guard level, because that is the level needed to assist that military unification. So go and have a look at that on the UK column website. And if we're talking Brexit, Mike, we need to really bring back in Mr. Soros. Now, I know you covered part of this yesterday, but I think we need to have a look in some detail of what's going on here. So this was key to it, that Soros had pledged to an extra £100,000 to fight Brexit after a smear campaign. Now, several of the newspapers are reporting that if you dare to challenge what Mr. Soros is doing, then you are right-wing, you are extremist, and you are anti-Semitic. And he's vowed to fight people who dare to challenge him. So he's got, I believe, a personal wealth of somewhere around 18 billion is what the papers are saying.
Can I just clarify something? They're saying that if we criticise George Soros, we're anti-Semitic.
Yes.
So that would include Benjamin Netanyahu then?
Well, this is where it gets interesting, isn't
Yes.
it? But a lot of reports saying that Mr. Soros, is deeply upset because he's now being attacked by nasty right-wing extremists, and actually they're anti-Semite in what they're saying. So obviously somebody's touched a raw nerve here. We'd like to bring in this lady from the Best for Britain organisation. She was quoted in that independent article there, and this is what she said: "We live in a democracy and the right to freedom of speech is precious. Elements of the right-wing press don't seem to agree." You got that part, Mike? Mm-hmm. She goes on, "The UK's future with the EU is not a done deal. There is still a vote to come, and people across the country deserve to know the truth about the options on the table, one of which is staying and leading in the EU." And we better finish it off. She says, "George Soros and his foundation is kindly offering to help match fund to give Best for Britain more support so we can make sure this message gets out. The biggest decision on Brexit is yet to come." Now, if you have a look at the page there, you can see that, of course, this lady has worked in the European Union itself for many years. She's a product of the European Union. She's certainly working very, very closely with George Soros. And the aim of the game is, never mind that a majority of 17 million Britons voted to leave the EU, under George Soros's democracy or democratic system, together with Miss Todd, they're working to make sure that majority decision is now overturned. So if I just put a few pieces together here, if we have a look at the Open Government organisation which she's involved in, you can see there where the blue arrow is that it's actually received money from
Open Society.
Open Society, yeah. So Mr. Soros himself, and you can also see underlined down at the bottom that Open Government has also received money from the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office. There's $225,000 there, but actually I found other sums of money that the British government has given. So we can now see that the British government itself is giving money to help overturn that Brexit vote. And then you have to ask a question: does Theresa May actually know this, or is Theresa May simply the puppet and this Soros machinery is working all around her? It's difficult to tell, but what we can say is that immense power from George Soros, and he is working to simply put up a finger to those 17 million Britons who voted to leave the European Union. So here she is on the page. You can go and check this out yourself. I think it's important that you know who this lady is. Prior to working at One, she worked for 7 years in the European Parliament as a political advisor on development and relations with Africa, Caribbean and Pacific countries. She's prepared and participated in missions to Sudan, Chad, Mauritania, Indonesia, Mali, Kenya, Congo and Ethiopia. And she's worked as a short-term election observer in Liberia. How does she do all this? Well, she got a first-class BA Honours in Government and EU Studies at Newcastle University, and she's got a Master's in Political and Administrative Studies from the College of Europe in Bruges, Belgium. So this is how you do it. You are part of the EU machinery. You get a billionaire like George Soros to back you, and then you say, sorry guys, you didn't get the democracy right. You need our version. So here's an interesting gentleman called Paul Butlers, because I decided to phone Best for Britain to see if I could speak to Miss Todd to say, how does she justify saying that her form of democracy is right when 17 million voted to come out? I met the rudest man, I nearly said in Britain. I can't say that. There's probably somebody ruder than this man. But he was unbelievably rude to me on the phone, and including laughing when I said I couldn't hear him properly. This is more or less what went on. I couldn't hear this gentleman. I do have a slight hearing problem in my left ear. No politeness there, because he quickly said to me, I'll start shouting then. So he didn't care that I couldn't hear. He said, I'll shout. I don't care that you've asked for comment from Louise Todd. I'm giving you my opinion, and for Best of Britain. So you couldn't get through to this lady. This man was the doorkeeper. It was only his opinion that you were going to hear. Then I got a clue as to why this man was so hostile, because he said, oh, we've dealt with the UK column before. When I asked him why, he didn't want to tell me, or how that was. He then got on to that he didn't have to listen to any more of my questions, and eventually the phone call was cut off. So unbelievably rude man. If you go to his Twitter page, you can see tweet after tweet after tweet, which is clearly supporting George Soros. So I don't know whether he gets his pocket money. That's when his mum does allow him out. He probably gets a bit of pocket money from Uncle Soros. But just extraordinary. Now, why do we know this man? Well, we think it's because he was the communications man for the Lib Dem leader a little while ago. Right. And I just wonder whether it was this. This is just one of his tweets praising, who have we got here, Mr. Fallon. Yeah. And he's also tweeted out this one, which is about Syrian immigrants coming to UK, and basically how it's bad that they're not being properly looked after. And I thought this was a bit rich, because when UK column highlighted that some 350 Syrian children had gone missing, and we attempted to communicate with Tim Farron, he didn't want to know us, did he, Mike?
No.
And as a result, you wrote a really excellent letter in which you said this. It was this fact which gave us most concern when Tim Farron began his campaign to bring unaccompanied Syrian refugee children into this country's care system. We understand that while such children are in desperate need of help, Britain has a long history of condemning children in care to a life of sexual slavery. How appropriate against the background of Oxfam, Mike. So in January 2016, I wrote to Mr. Farron. I asked if he appreciated the position he would be bringing these children into. I asked him a very simple question. What would he personally be doing to make sure these children would be safe once they arrived here? I asked if he would personally guarantee that the whereabouts of these children would be known until they reached the age of 18. Mr. Farron's response was silence. And I think this young man, Mr. Butters, I think he was caught off balance when I called him this morning, because we had met before. If we haven't met before, then I'm very happy to correct that for Mr. Butters, but I will still say the man I spoke to at Best for Britain, unbelievably rude. Another reason why Best for Britain might be getting a little bit wobbly is because this lady has just pulled out, Gina Miller, and the headline, which is in a number of papers, but we've just taken Russia Today, Soros-backed anti-Brexit group is undemocratic, co-founder Gina Miller says. So she told The Telegraph, when I read the coverage, I pulled back and thought this is not where I think this should be going. It was a good decision to part ways. Best for Britain is undemocratic. One of the objectives cannot be to bring down a government, not without an election or referendum. The idea of bringing down a government and guerrilla warfare, I don't agree with any of that. I'm a transparency campaigner. It doesn't matter which side of the argument you're on. If you're going to have funders who are getting involved in something that could determine Britain's future, then the public has a right to know who is backing it. This is about the future of our country. And I'm going to say I couldn't fault that statement by this lady.
No, I far from agree with Gina Miller's position on the European Union.
Absolutely.
But that's absolutely correct, what she said there.
Very interesting. So this is the other man we should pay attention who's in the mix, Lord Mullock-Brown. He says, we're talking about a defeat for the Conservative Party of historic proportions. The argument that somehow what we're trying to do is anti-Tory. I'm the cavalry. I'm coming to rescue the Tories from their own mistake. Our feeling is that the general assumption out there was that the battle was over. We wanted to show that there was still a resistance there. We are deadly serious about trying to reverse the decision of 17 million people. But have a look at him. This is a UN man, and he's also a member of the World Bank. So we've got the usual people in the mix. And we'll just end on another headline there. George Soros, the man who broke the Bank of England, backing secret plot to thwart Brexit. No, I'm going to say Gina Miller is right. This is a plot to bring down the British government. And I think Soros, unbelievably dangerous man. Perhaps it's time for there to be an arrest warrant in this country.
Okay, Royal Bank of Scotland. There's a big fight brewing, and it's well brewed over the conduct of the Royal Bank of Scotland following the 2008 financial crash. This is to do with their subunit Global Restructuring Group, GRG. GRG was supposed to provide support for businesses that were suffering as a result of the financial collapse. But what they ended up doing was bullying, making threats to companies. They put small businesses out of business. People lost their livelihoods. People lost their homes as a result of systematic asset stripping by GRG staff. The staff who were later discovered to be making comments such as, some of these companies that were working with their basket cases, they were saying that missed opportunities will mean missed bonuses. So they were only concerned about their bonuses, and they were putting companies under deliberately rather than offering them support in order to asset strip them and do that. But in the meantime, the Financial Conduct Authority had produced a report. They were not making that report public, so that report was leaked last week. 350-page document. It was seen by many of the mainstream newspapers, including the Mail, the BBC, the Guardian, and so on. And so, the information was out anyway. It showed what were described as shocking episodes, and although there were no named there were no individuals named in the report. Now, the Treasury Select Committee and the Financial Conduct Authority have been in a row over this ever since. The Financial Conduct Authority has written the report, and they were given until last Friday to either publish it in full or to share it with MPs. But the Financial Conduct Authority was refusing to publish the report because they said a leaked version of the report does not change the FCA's obligation to comply with the law. in order to get the report published. The FCA wrote to the Treasury Committee last week and set out the next steps we're taking. So they're still refusing to publish. And now MPs are saying, well, if the FCA isn't going to publish it, then perhaps we'll publish it instead. Now, I can't remember, is it 18 months ago, 2 years ago, you did an interview with Colm Canning from Ulster Bank, which was owned by RBS.
Yeah.
Well, actually, we're going to show that interview immediately after this news programme. I'm sure many people have seen it, but if you haven't, watch it, because, of course, he was whistleblowing on exactly this behaviour. He left the bank because of this behaviour, and then was subsequently hounded by the police and so on.
And the bank itself, of course.
Yes.
And we just say, very unassuming man who is still out there working to expose what the banks are doing. This is just the sort of individual like John Wedger that we need to be giving maximum support to. So do have a watch of that.
Right, RT reports that yesterday the White House has announced $1.5 trillion of infrastructure, of an infrastructure package. Trump had announced a sweeping infrastructure plan worth $1.5 trillion. They say it's part of a broader $4 trillion plus budget plan that envisions public-private partnerships to revamp America's aging structures. This is quite timely because just a week or so ago, the American Journal of Transportation had produced this headline: over 54,000 American bridges structurally deficient, according to an analysis of federal data. They're saying 54,259 of the nation's 612,670 bridges are rated structurally deficient, and that Americans are crossing these bridges 174 million times every day. They say that the average age of structurally deficient bridges is 67 years compared to 40 years for non-deficient bridges, and so on. So timely, perhaps it is, but the key point here was public-private partnerships, because unfortunately for the American people, this is not going to be centrally funded. It's not going to be funded in the normal way. It's going to rely on public-private partnerships, and we all know how those end, don't we? Because unfortunately this is a theme of Britain's national infrastructure plan as well. And if we look at how Britain's infrastructure plan is to be funded, we have around 50% of the money, I suppose, coming from central funding, almost 50% coming from private funding, and a large tranche of mixed funding as well. But this is the theme for this type of situation, and of course we know where that ends up, Brian.
Yeah, well, ends up with PFI projects and eventually the collapsed infrastructure being handed back to the public when the private can't cope with it anymore.
Well, exactly, and we're ending up with people losing their jobs because companies like Carillion have been asset stripped by the various organisations that are auditing them and feeding off them. Feeding off them is the term I was thinking of. So not great. In the meantime, the disabled have been used for many years to push forward certain policy agendas. And now that they're not so important from a public policy point of view, of course, they're being hounded by the government. And this Mirror article saying that the Tories have spent £100 million trying to stop disabled people from getting the help that they're entitled to. This is numbers obtained through Freedom of Information requests showing that the Department for Work and Pensions has spent £108.1 million on direct staffing costs for ESA and personal independence payment appeals since 2015, and this covers mandatory reconsiderations, internal DWP reviews, and appeals to tribunals run by Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunals Service. And the monthly cost has been steadily rising. In December last year, they spent £5.3 million on mandatory reconsiderations, and so it goes on. So this is quite a report, and really reinforces the point that we've been making for quite a long time, that many groups that are trying to campaign on certain issues tend to get government support when that suits the government policy.
Yeah.
And as soon as that policy is met or the policy changes, people are just left high and dry.
Yeah, but what a sum of money, 100 million, Mike. What could that do to the individuals if that sum was simply broken down and given to help disabled people, or at least disabled people in particular cases? I would guess that 100 million could actually make quite an impact straight away. You don't want to spend it actually helping them. You want to spend it making sure that you can actually keep them suppressed so that they don't come asking for any more money in the future. We're getting more and more evidence that the style of government, it was there under Blair, so this is not just a Conservative thing, but very aggressive, oppressive government. And this is increasingly coming in. Of course, the gay community are the new target. If gay people out there think that the government is going to stay supporting them, well, no, it's not, because the next stage of the agenda is transhumanism. So the gays at the moment are being encouraged, are being supported in government policy. Our prediction is, and I'm very confident this prediction, you're going to see exactly the same thing turning as we've seen turned on disabled people. Well, let's end with the BBC. Remember that according to that Daily Mail report a few weeks ago, 83% of Britons did not trust the BBC. And of course, here we've got a classic example of why not. This is BBC Radio 4, Out of the Ordinary, The Queen's Enemies. And this is an investigation, a documentary, which they carried out talking to people who were supporting the Magna Carta, people who were supporting the Constitution of UK. And yes, we do have one. And what has gone on here? Well, the reporter spent a lot of time with various groups of people. He's spoken to them. If you listen to the interview, you will hear people speaking in a very calm, logical way, saying why they're concerned about what's happening, why they're interested in the Constitution and the Magna Carta. And then around that, you just simply hear this BBC journalist, Julian Jenkins, giving his comments. So he doesn't have to produce any factual information at all. He just allows the people to talk, and then basically he smears them by introducing his personal opinion without any real substance. So this is a masterpiece of BBC attack on constitutional matters. If I just go back to this one here, you notice that the image that he's used is clearly designed to make anybody who's involved with concerns over the Constitution or using Article 61, you are, how do we describe the look of those two gentlemen in that image?
Nutters?
Idiots or nutters. So this is the BBC. They smear the people that they've interviewed by the selection of the image. And this gentleman himself says that he's editor. So he's primary production for this so-called documentary. But what is it clearly designed to do? Anybody who's fighting against council tax or fighting for the Constitution or talking about constitutional issues such as the Queen and mediatisation or the power of the barons, the BBC journalists simply sneering at them. I think this is really one of the most offensive tactics by the BBC. We're going to spend some more time having a look at this journalist himself. We will attempt to contact him, and we will report how the BBC reacts when you attempt to contact one of their journalists to maybe say, I don't think you've produced a fair report. Encourage people to listen to that, though, because obviously the more people who challenge the BBC on their style of reporting, the better it is. That's it for today's programme. I'm going to say thank you very much to everybody who's joined us. A very big thank you from John Wedger to all the people that have supported his walk. This is really excellent, and I'm sure a great many things are going to spin off of his time on the road. But this is what it takes, not a government investigation into sexual abuse and harassment and the harassment of children. It takes good men and women to stand up and be counted to really get the message out there. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll be back same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.